So the first question covers haptics. I was speaking about haptics in my earlier conversation, and the question is if haptics actually have a role, if they have value when it comes to cinematic VR, or if it helps to tell a story. And then a follow-up question is where the obstacles are in exploring these possibilities. Well, the question touches on our definition of cinematic VR and gaming VR. So the way the question was asked is that it assumes that gaming experiences are not narrative, or let's say less narrative, whereas festival-targeted projects are more narrative. I think that on its own is not true anymore. Festivals are programming increasingly more projects that are experiences, but not necessarily narrative ones. So for example, ayahuasca is an experience. It's about taking the drug ayahuasca and going on this spiritual journey. So it's not a narrative experience in the traditional sense, but it was programmed by several VR festivals, or several festivals in general. So I would say a piece does not need to be a traditional narrative piece or a filmed cinematic VR piece to be interesting to festivals. Now, the second part of this question is, with what we've done over the past 7 years in shooting VR films, how do haptics help in conveying stories in narrative projects? Well, I would say that when it comes to haptics, there are a lot of different applications. There's haptic feedback that relates to touch, and that generally applies to interactivity with the hands. So one example is vibration systems. So you can touch an object and your controllers will vibrate. So other forms of physical feedback can also be considered haptics. One example is like the Lumiere brothers. They made what is considered to be the very first film ever made. It's a scene of this train coming into the station. Now at the time, people jumped out of their seats because they thought that train would come out of the screen and run them over. Now imagine recreating that scene in cinematic VR. You put on the VR headset and suddenly you see that train in high resolution, high frame rate, 360 degrees in stereo vision, and suddenly as that train gets closer to you, the floor starts to vibrate and you feel a rumble go through your body. Now suddenly you start forgetting that that train is not really there, because all of your senses tell you that it is really there. That, I think, creates a much more powerful scene and a more powerful story than it would be without haptic sensations. The second question, or the second part of this question was, is this actually necessary? Well, I would say with any technology, it should be used where it adds to the immersion and transcends being a gimmick. So often that's the case, it's a gimmick, and that's true for VR in general. If you can tell your story, the story that you have in mind in a 2D traditional format, there is no reason for you to make that story in VR. And it's up to you as a maker to explore and discover a story in yourself that cannot be told in any other medium than VR. So the same goes for haptic feedback. And the final part of this first question was, where might content creators start to explore the possibilities regardless of budget? Well, budget is not really the problem anymore. Most VR controllers already support basic rumble functions, so there is no additional cost in that. And if you want to go further and explore more intense haptic feedback, like rumbling floors or your body rumbling, or seats with haptics, your hardware costs are going to be less than $500. So the main obstacle is your idea. Find something that really fundamentally needs haptic feedback, and what that idea is, that's the hard part, not the technology. So the second question is about the headsets themselves. Like, why are they not lighter and more comfortable by now? Well, people have been asking for much more than lighter, more comfortable headsets. They're also asking for higher resolution, higher frame rate, more realistic depth, wider field of view, no cables, no computers, etc., etc. And they want all of this, of course, to be available in a cheaper format. So fulfilling all of those wishes is certainly possible from a technology standpoint. It mainly takes time. But in order to get companies to invest that time, it has to be worthwhile. And that's where economies of scale come in. When you're making a headset for a few thousand enthusiasts, the super lightweight components are way too expensive to develop. So now that the number of VR users is growing, companies are investing more and more in more advanced technologies. So the Oculus Quest, for example, is already lighter than the first Oculus, or the first Oculus Quest, which came out about 18 months ago. That's a really short time in terms of life cycles. So I believe that in the future we'll see a hybrid type of headset which can do both VR and AR, and all these kind of headsets will become lighter and cheaper over time. Now, the third question was that you noticed that I call myself a maker instead of a filmmaker or a content creator, and how does this affect my perspectives in viewing or creating projects, and what does that mean in terms of my role in this industry? So 7 years ago, when we started creating 360 video, it was quickly associated with film, and I never agreed with the term cinematic VR. Since it implied that the medium is a form of cinema. I believe that the potential of the medium is much broader. It's not just VR, and it's any and all technologies that place you inside an experience and make you part of it. So I think our industry is called the immersive industry, not just VR or mixed reality or AR. So in that sense, I don't see myself as just a filmmaker or just a game maker, or a storyteller for that matter. I think that the creatives in this field are creating worlds and experiences that our audience in that sense are not viewers in. They are also not players. They are guests in the world that we create and invite them into. So therefore the term director also doesn't fully cover what we do anymore. The title director implies that we are controlling or directing what we want a viewer to see or think or feel. In this medium, we give people a lot more freedom than in film. We can still provide our guests with guidance in experiencing the worlds that we make, but ultimately we are makers who create experiences that offer different levels of freedom instead of trying to fully control the worlds that we make. So the fourth question is about content creators. Should they play more VR games instead of viewing VR films, and will it help their creative process? I believe that in the immersive field, more formats and technologies come together than in any other medium. So it can involve gaming, but also theater and film and art and science and education, and the list goes on and on. So it's certainly not limited to VR films or VR games. So I would recommend those interested not to focus on technology, but on ideas. So even if you're not a gamer, that does not mean that you won't be touched by an immersive experience. There's an experience, for example, called Make Noise. It encourages the user to literally make noise. You call out the names of women that have been oppressed and who overcame that oppression. To use your voice, you do not need to be a gamer. You also do not need to be a film fan. So explore as much works as you can, also beyond the realm of current VR works. A project such as Journey is an experience made for the PlayStation, and it's not really a game. It's a poetic experience that appeals to both gamers and non-gamers and can really open up a maker's eyes to what's possible in terms of challenging the definitions of the medium. At the last minute, you came in with two more questions. One of them is, could I share the difficulties that I encountered and how we dealt with them? Most important thing is don't focus on the naysayers. There's a lot of people that will be negative. We are not here to convince the naysayers. It's best to focus your energy on the new and, work with those people that are excited about your ideas. That's the biggest difficulty, dealing with those naysayers on an emotional level. So ignore it, focus on the positive. The final question was if we could go back and change anything, or if I could go back and change anything in past works, what would I change? Especially after seeing user reactions. Well, I would not change anything about anything that I've made. This industry and making in this industry is about learning, about discovering, about exploring uncharted territory and moving forward. Sure, I will learn and listen to user feedback and integrate that in new experiences, but I would not go back and change a thing.